Welcome back everyone to the 2022 InfinityBox Forum and for our next conversation, which is around accelerating social procurement. So we all know that sourcing from impact-focused ethical startups can play a critical role in changing large businesses. However, we also know there are lots of challenges and roadblocks with this approach. So in this conversation, we're going to be hearing from 4 of the CW100, 2 on the corporate side and 2 entrepreneurs, moderated by the brilliant Mike Barry, about how we can tackle this issue and generate more business for impact-driven startups. So to introduce everyone, Mike is the board trustee at A Blueprint for Better Business. Our 2 corporate leaders, we have Alejandra Sánchez Ayala, head of sustainability at CNA Mexico, and Christian Chandran, who is the global engagement leader for social responsibility at Amazon. And our 2 entrepreneurs, Emily Ewell, founder and CEO of Pantys, and Shashwat Gangwal, who is a co-founder and CEO of InfinityBox. So Mike, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, and delighted to join you all today. And I just wanted to reflect for 30 seconds on why meaningful business is so very important. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I was in the majority of every conversation on the planet about sustainable business. Today on this platform, I'm absolutely in the minority. And we'll be exiting soon, stage left, to allow a new generation of young leaders to come through. So it's brilliant to see what meaningful business is doing to sort of change and democratize sustainable business. So look, we've got a homework question today. Really simple one. How do we scale social procurement? Small businesses that have got impact at the very heart of everything that they do, but it's so hard to get past that impenetrable wall of big business procurement teams. So we're going to spend 40 minutes now with a wonderful panel that Tom's introduced, exploring that. And I'll start with a very simple question. You know, what is the business case for a big business and a small business to work together in this way? And Alejandra, I'm going to start with you and then pop across to Christian to get that big corporate view of what's in it for you. Then I'm going to come to Shashwat and Emily as well to get your perspective about what you bring to large business as well. Alejandra, over to you.
Yes. Well, one thing that is a clearly obvious relationship between like the suppliers who actually do well and perform well in audits is that actually those are the ones who deliver in time with better quality, with formality, that they stick to their commitments. We see a very clear relationship between like how they perform in compliance and how they perform in the rest of their business. As the saying goes, no? The way you do anything is the way you do everything. So for us, it's very clear that when a supplier is good, following their own code of ethics, following our code of conduct, acting upon that, it's around all of the activities of the business. Also about risk mitigation, knowing what's going on in your factories, knowing what is going on in your supply chain. It's a way to actually be able to prevent any kind of disruption in the supply chain or any negative impact in the branding of the company. And last but not least important, I think one that is a little bit more intangible one is the one that has to do with actually how the employees of your own company feels the way you do business, how you stick to your basically to a set of values. And if this is part of your set of values, a lot of people with talent and with a strong set of ethics are going to want to work basically with you.
Alejandra, thank you for a wonderful brief introduction to the importance of business case for the large corporate. Christian, can you build upon that, please?
Sure. I think just to add to what Alejandra mentioned, it in terms of it brings in a variety of product lines, and it comes up with a bunch of innovative products. When you think of looking at social procurement, brings in a kind of a unique freshness and energy into the procurement itself. Kind of moving away from very legacy procurement models. But coming into what large companies look at is definitely these are current investor expectations as well. So it's kind of coming up on a regular basis. There are questions asked on a regular basis. And as also Alejandra mentioned, it's good PR at the end of the day. And that kind of adds value to that. And overall, it also builds in the whole social value in it. So I'll kind of leave there in terms of that holistic social value it brings in to companies like us and many other companies in the globe. So yeah, that's where the business case lies.
Christian, thank you. And great to hear some acknowledgement there on the call from our canine friend as well, that always heading in the right direction. So look, we've had a business case from a large corporate perspective here. impact procurement teams, they're bringing great quality, they're bringing innovative business models, they're bringing passion and energy into your big corporate teams. Shashwat and Emily, if I can come to you now to get your perspective, what do you think you're bringing into large corporates? And what's in it for you? What's your business case? Shashwat, if I could start with you.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So I think there are, beyond the social value and the environmental value that we could drive as an entrepreneur, the energy and passion that we bring, I think there is a definite need from the regulatory and the customer perspective as well. There's a push that is that is making the corporations and other organizations move towards a more sustainable ways of procurement. Beyond that, there are tech advancements which are allowing these new technologies to be incorporated into existing frameworks. But I think the most important thing is still the triple bottom line, which means the economic value that we drive. So, I mean, if I were to give examples of any reuse models, there are higher asset utilizations that you could drive, etc. And this not only means better revenues, better profits, but also more stable supply chains. So I think there is a whole array of whole array of economic value that can be driven, and it just totally depends on the unique relationship.
Excellent. And I will come back to all of you in a moment. Just ask for one or two practical examples where you've seen this either within your own organisation or others actually become real. But before I do that, Emily, get your perspective.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. So Pantys is a fashion femtech brand. Our core product is menstrual underwear, which in its nature is a sustainable value proposition as a product. So if we look globally, it's estimated that up to 1 trillion disposable menstrual products are thrown away every year across the world. And these products are mostly made of plastic and can take 500 to 800 years to decompose. So I think that when we look at procurement, obviously it's a little bit different as a strategy from building like a more sustainable shoe that everybody wears to actually going into behavior change, both up, directly with our consumers, but also with looking at us as procurement for, pharmacies, for example, or for other industries. So we have a partnership with Johnson & Johnson. And I think that that's an interesting example of how a startup can start working with big companies to help fulfill more sustainable solutions for them. So now we're a supplier with them, also working with pharmacies in Brazil. So that's a really interesting example of how we're working kind of upstream with bigger companies. But then, after we launched, we started getting a lot of questions from our consumers about, well, how sustainable is the product? And I think that there's kind of a taboo there, that there's no such thing as a 100% sustainable product or 100% sustainable brand. If you're consuming something by nature, it's not sustainable. So I think that's important to recognize as a business owner, as a leader, but we have been looking at, and one of the biggest changes we made is we switched all of our major fabrics to biodegradable fabric technologies. So a typical nylon underwear that you would use, female underwear, would be take about 100 years to decompose. And so ours takes 3 years to decompose. So going into the kind of deep tech side and textiles and everything that we use to supply, we use all reusable packaging and biodegradable packaging, but really deep diving. And through that, we became the first lingerie brand globally to launch carbon labels for our products. And so I think that that's been a way for, and obviously it's a huge simplification into our environmental impact as a brand, but it's, for me, the best way that we can communicate and educate the consumer, and also communicate and educate inside our team and work with our suppliers to understand what impact we're actually having and how can we reduce that.
Emily, that's fantastic practical example. And just before I sort of pass the floor back to your colleagues to sort of expand upon their answers, I just want to pick up on this thing, behavior change, because I sense a lot of large corporates are now starting to explore getting their consumers to think differently about what they buy and how they use it. But they're very nervous about it. Again, we don't want to hear anything confidential, but what was the sort of your experience of working with a big corporate, asking people potentially to do some very different things with something that we're very used to from the past, that we're doing in a certain way?
No, that's a great question. I think, behavior change is one of the hardest things to inspire in a market. You can't force people to change. So I always use the word inspire, because I think that that's really how we focus a lot on education as a main vehicle to help inspire our customers. But then also from the corporate perspective, for example, Johnson & Johnson is a competitor of ours. And what's really exciting is that I think that the mindset of companies now, especially in looking at new technologies and more sustainable solutions, is becoming less competitive and more collaborative. So the fact that they came to us and they said, this isn't our core competency. We don't make apparel products, but you do. And we became the first clinically approved liner technology in the world. So we have the highest standards in terms of health and functionality on the market. And I think that that was a way that their team saw that this is the future. They see that it's not going to be tomorrow or next week or next month that everybody is going to be using menstrual underwear, but maybe 10 years from now, everyone will have a pair of menstrual underwear in their drawer. And so it's more of a bet for the long term and kind of getting your stakes in the ground for this change that's happening. And they know that there's no reversing that. And I think that's really exciting.
Thank you, Emily. And Alejandra and Christian, I'm going to come to you in a minute to get your perspective about your businesses and behavior change and products and service. But Shashwat, you've heard Emily give an example of what she's doing. Just explain a little bit about your business model and how you're working with large corporates.
Of course. So I run a company called InfinityBox, where the idea is to become the default reuse packaging platform, be it for e-commerce, be it for food delivery, what have you. Wherever there is any sort of packaging being used, if it's disposable, we'll make it reusable. If it's reusable, we'll find asset utilization efficiencies, right? So if you think of an example of Swiggy, a company that we work with, which is the largest food delivery aggregator in India, by providing them an organized reusable packaging marketplace, not only are we reducing their headache around procuring inventory, managing headache, and managing hygiene for all the stakeholders in the supply chain, we're also improving their asset utilization of the delivery fleet, right? It's going there and they earn a certain amount of money for delivering the order, but then if they can get the containers back, it helps them earn higher income, which leads to higher retention, so on and so forth, right? So these are changes that you see with every product as a service business model. And that was a specific business case for one of the aspects of the business case for us.
Another great example, and again, I'm just reflecting, having spent all those years in large corporates myself, how difficult it is to change an internal mindset, whether it's a Johnson & Johnson, Marks & Spencer, the partners you're working with, Shashwat. So, Christian, if I could just come to you, just give me a perspective about some of the opportunities you see from small social impact suppliers coming in and helping you think a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I was mentioning about bringing in that freshness and energy, because some of these large companies, and I'm not just speaking for Amazon, but the companies which have been existed here for a very long time, there's been very traditional sourcing models and looking at businesses expansion. But I think the mindset is changing from expansion to creating that ripple effect. Creating that ripple effect in terms of, looking at social procurement, looking at sustainable, organizations which come in with inbuilt, sustainable, products as well as, sustainable services. So I think that's where the key is. It's not anymore just expansion and, capturing the market. It's more about creating that change and creating that ripple effect and ensuring that, things are getting circular in the real sense. So I think that mindset change is happening.
Thank you, Christian. Alejandra.
Yeah, I will add on a little bit of what you mentioned, Mike, about more inside of the company. How do you actually create that engagement with sustainability or with social procurement? And I think something I have noticed in my own professional experience and from others that I have shared with is that sometimes in sustainability, we believe that everybody understands exactly what's going on and everybody should understand why it's important. And it's so obvious for us that you think like, why not everybody is like super engaged like I am? But how much do you know about finance? How much do you know about IT? No? So I think it's very important to actually talk about these things with people from other areas within your company, because a lot of people don't know how supply chains work. They don't really know how a factory works. They don't really understand why you have to have a code of conduct, talk about forced labor or child labor, or what fire extinguisher has to be in this height or this other height. I think it's very important to actually talk about these things inside the company in a condescending, unpatronizing way of like, of course we have to do this, it's obvious, like try to explain the why behind it, and that's the way you can engage inside of your company.
And listening to all four of you over the last 10 minutes, it reminds me that business now is not becoming, big business is not becoming 1% less bad every year. It's having to make huge leaps, diesel car to electric, meat-based diet to plant-based diet. And big business finds it really hard to disrupt itself. You know, every big business thinks it thinks about disruption, but sometimes you need to bring the ideas into a Johnson & Johnson from outside and really get you to think about not product, but service. So that's been a really inspiring start to the conversation. I'd like to just sort of build, having heard a very positive story, what are the challenges we are facing in doing this? And maybe I'll start with Emily and Shashwat on this, and then I'll come across to Christian and Alejandra. But Emily, without naming names, what do you find, what makes it difficult to work with big businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, as you mentioned, it's a mindset shift. And I think the education that we do with our consumers also helps kind of open doors, both in terms of corporate partners, both in terms of retailers. For example, we are now very multi-channel. So we were born as a digital brand and focused on online. Still today, online is our biggest channel. But and I joke when we launched, if we went to a pharmacy and said, oh, will you sell our product? They probably would have laughed at us in the face, you know? So we had to build, now we have 500,000 followers on Instagram. So we had to build this huge community and prove that the product works. We have, 30,000 reviews on our products. And that credibility also helps not just show education that it's important, but also show results that the people want it and that it's going to be a big part of the future. So when we go, for example, to wholesale partners, retail partners, either on the health side or on the fashion side, we bring a lot of data to the table in terms of what we hear from customers, how it makes an impact on their lives. We launched last year, for example, in Selfridges, a pop-up in London on Oxford Street. There was a Pantys space in the format of a women's bathroom, like in the middle of the lingerie section. And so we bring a lot of storytelling to also make it a light and fun conversation with the customer. And that was supposed to stay there for 2 months and it ended up staying for 5 months. So that was a huge validation. And Selfridges at the time was kind of like, oh, we know this is important. And they're a very progressive retailer, very different than a lot of other retailers in the market in the fashion space. And so then after that, it was easier. This year we launched in the Galeries Lafayette. We did a huge expansion to 27 stores of theirs this year, the Bijenkorf in the Netherlands. Most of our retail is in Brazil, but we also have a very strong and growing ecosystem in Europe. And so I think that proof of concept, being able to bring proof of concepts and cases that have had success and generated value for these corporate partners, that makes the transformation so much easier, because then they see it working, they can understand how it's a part of the future, and then they say, okay, we're gonna join as well. And so we kind of help them with that education and help them with these use cases and success cases to make that easier for us too.
Emily, thank you. And just building upon that point about Selfridges, they've committed that 46% of their turnover by 2030 will be from circular new business models. So whereas most retailers are just reducing by a tiny bit their footprint each year, they're imagining a great leap forward. They've got a unique business model, but they're thinking about doing things really differently, and they need partners like you to do that. Shashwat, if I can come across to you for your perspective as well, what makes it difficult to get traction within big corporates to do what you're suggesting?
Great. So, I think I would club factors into two major buckets: the macro factors of the geography that you operate in, and factors specific to the company that you're working with. So macro factors would definitely include regulations and customer behavior. I think we already spoke about, people are sort of averse to any model that might require the slightest change in customer behavior. With respect to regulations, I think it all comes down to how strictly they are implemented. But very specifically and there are other factors that govern the macro scenario. But then if you look at firm specific factors, I think one is definitely, do you have the right access, or are you, just cold calling? And secondly, even if you have the right access, what is the lead time for a certification, right? I mean, any large corporate will have their own set of vendors that they have been dealing with for decades, and it's very difficult to, build that relationship or get those certifications. I think the second is, are you building a drop-in solution to their existing supply chains? I mean, you can't go to a Walmart and say that I'm going to give you a different sized bottle tomorrow, right? I mean, you'll have to work with like millions of people on the ground and a huge supply chain, which we cannot even fathom, right? So is it a drop-in solution? If it is, then there is a scope for you to get access and get verified. So I think these are the challenges that how I think about them.
Fantastic. So again, Alejandra and Christian, I'm going to come to you. You've heard some very positive stories. You've heard some of the challenges. How do you think large corporates can be more welcoming and more supportive of social impact procurement, SMEs coming into their lives? Alejandra, if we can start with you.
Yes, I start with the challenge or barrier and how we can overcome it. I think something that for me is very clear when we are trying to implement global approaches in local context is that it's a big difference between like the expectation from maybe like a European or American set of values that maybe the ones that happen in other countries, for example, in Mexico, which is the context where I work now. So it's a huge challenge in terms of not only the level of maturity of the supply chain, which is something important, but also the way of how some of these requirements are perceived. For giving an example, child labor in certain contexts, it seems like the worst thing that will happen, and in some countries it's the most normal thing. Not saying it's good, it's just saying that the perception of the community is very different than the expectation maybe from the brand. So I think one way that smaller players in the supply chain is to adapt in a way to the better ways, while also continue to bring into the conversation why some things doesn't make sense in this context. Not from a point of view of like, I will never do it, I won't do it. It's just being aware of like, okay, in this context, this idea from maybe an external international framework doesn't really make sense. How do we make the main core idea behind that to function in this context? So to have some flexibility, I would say from both sides, but having very clear which are like the limits where you cannot cross. So I think that's something that comes to mind: flexibility and adaptability.
Alejandra, thank you. And again, in other businesses, sometimes in big procurement teams, I don't see flexibility. We must do it in the same way every time, even if we're buying from a big business or a small business. And again, I think we as large corporates have got to be much more flexible in terms of how we respond and invite smaller businesses in, because if we don't, we miss the business case we've been talking about. Christian, over to you.
Yeah, I think, mentioning or summarizing that whole bunch of barriers which we see from big companies' side, you can put a large box called compliance needs, which are very, very important, which remain barriers. And that needs to be something which is, crucial when it comes to small businesses as well, and how we adapt to that. Quality standards definitely remain an important criteria as well, not with small quantity, but when it becomes big quantities. So that's something which is important. And then there is also an experience which, we've sometimes we've seen where it is to do with capacities. Sometimes you have a great product, but then, it takes off well, but then when the capacity issue comes in, that becomes a bit of a concern. Now, sharing challenges, one of the things which needs to be done, at least from large corporation sites, and we see a positive story there, is to make commitments to make commitments towards social procurement. There are several examples of commitments made by big companies like Unilever, Nestle, where diverse procurement is seen as one of the major areas. There is artisan-based commitments made. There are women-owned business-based commitments made by big companies like Walmart, companies like Amazon as well. And then we have certain guilds or certain associations which are coming in to also support such kind of social procurement. So yeah, that's probably some of the areas that we need to be looking at.
Christian, thank you. And again, the question for you and for Alejandra, do you create almost like a university to help these small suppliers understand your requirements, how to create the systems and management processes within their business that they can respond to your quality requirements?
I can kind of go first, and that's one of the things I wanted to say. In addition to making commitments, the critical work here is demystifying standards, terms, and conditions. You can easily make small businesses get lost in this whole paperwork of standards and conditions. There are companies, I can give an example from Amazon where there is a seller university, which is available for, the sellers on the platform to kind of go and understand certain requirements. So a lot of other companies are also kind of looking at that. So unless we demystify these standards, it's not going to work. So that's probably a very, very crucial step.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I really like that example, and I like case studies. A small business can see how another small business grew with Amazon. Alejandra, anything that you would add?
Yeah, we here in Mexico, we work with a lot of factories that we actually have developed on the last 5, 6, 7 years to actually increase their compliance in our own set of values or code of conduct. But we do have in our team, I think that's a very good practice we perform here, is we do have auditors, which is like the normal role of somebody who goes to the factory, checks what's correct or is incorrect according to our set of rules. And then we have another role, a job position that is called developer, which this person goes there and basically acts like a consultant. Okay, this is your audit result. This is what we find. Like, now let me help you to find a way to solve these things, to actually help you to prioritize, because something that tagging along with what Christian said, like it can be very overwhelming. You get like a corrective action plan with so many issues, with so many things, but not all of them are equally important. There are things that you really have to focus, and there are things that actually comes from a more systemic issue that maybe you can start solving the root cause, and then other things will get solved or are not so urgent to be solved. So we do provide that service to our suppliers, and over the years we have been able to change a little bit the perception of like, oh yeah, this brand just come and audit me, and like they ask for so many things from so many different departments, to actually see like, okay, well, these are like actually my business partners, and they are helping me towards achieving something that benefits both of us. So it took a lot of time to change this. We haven't been able to deal with all suppliers, but I think we are really seeing now like a deeper transformation than what we have 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah. Alejandra, again, another great example how we as big businesses have got to think about being coaches and mentors as well as auditors. We will always have to audit. We need to coach and mentor. Emily, Shashwat, you've heard some really inspiring stories then from big corporates. Does that help you? And are there other things that you need to help you? Maybe Shashwat, you go first.
Thanks for that. So a brief background that I forgot to mention. I was an investor for a couple of years where I did invest in a lot of startups globally, especially in the plastics space and food space. One thing that I realized was that exactly what Alejandra and Christian have been pointing out, that a lot of large businesses have a lot of these requirements that you need to go through, right? One of them is demonstrating at a certain scale. Now that scale, what that means for a small startup versus for an Amazon is like, worlds apart. For somebody who's building a new material and developing that and delivering 1 ton of that might require a few $1 million, even then that might not be enough for even testing for Amazon, right? So the idea is, in my opinion, what we always saw or felt, that to solve this chicken and egg problem, that you won't get enough money if you don't get to that scale, but you don't have enough money to get to that scale, is doing quick pilots and POCs. And if you do that with a dedicated team, in short, with obviously the caveats that it might fail and whatever your brand is at stake, etc. But if you find the right set of partners who are willing to pilot, even at 1 or 2 locations, then that's worth a try, right? And that's how you quickly see in front of your own eyes that it might actually drive value, because otherwise it's all on paper, right? And that is a big problem. So I think the biggest learning I had, and what I have tried to emulate in my business, is to go and tell people that I'll give you a free service for a month, right? Try it out, see if it works. Because then they're like, there's nothing, I mean, I don't have anything to lose. And that's what I've realized during my time at either McKinsey or at as a VC. So I think that's something that I hope I get to see a lot more in larger corporates.
Shashwat, thank you. Just a reminder to everybody on the call, please, if you've got any questions for the panel, do put them into the chat and I will make sure that they are answered for you. Emily, can I just get your perspective on what would help you and entrepreneurs like you accelerate your scale through partnership with large businesses?
No, absolutely. I think, Alejandra, a lot of what you mentioned from a procurement standpoint rings a lot of bells for us as a producer of apparel. I think especially apparel is one of the industries that has a lot of different standards. And I think as a brand, sometimes that can be difficult to navigate. In Brazil, they have really amazing standards around called ABBTEX. It's a certification that is probably the most rigorous in the market. And it's something that took us about 2 years to go through the whole process. And, you know, it takes a lot of time and effort to get there. So maybe something that corporations or even partners could do to help is, you know, helping guide maybe smaller startups or companies that are working on more sustainable products through those processes that by themselves maybe is very overwhelming or, you know, very time-consuming task. And so we had to become kind of experts in our own sense of figuring out how to navigate that in the best way. And I think, you know, as we've partnered now with some bigger brands, we have some like Farm, which is now a brand that's becoming more popular as well internationally, but we have some European brands now that we're starting to develop products for. We had to go through another whole set of audits. And so I think that helping facilitate, and the more that we see standards that are more global, like we're a certified B Corporation. I think the B Corporation framework is amazing for creating a business that's sustainable. If there was something like that for procurement specifically, I think that kind of like a guideline with points, you know, that because every supplier and every partner has their own system. And I think that that's a huge challenge for whoever's in manufacturing.
Yeah. I really like that because, again, it's difficult enough being an entrepreneur trying to talk to 3 big business partners and they're all asking for different standards, different audits. It's time consuming for everybody. It's time consuming for big suppliers, let alone small ones. So Grant's just asked a really good question in the chat. How do you work with people both within big businesses and their consumers who are not as far on the green journey as your core customer? So you've been very good, Emily, Shashwat, at sort of having a conversation with very eco consumers, but then you found a way to broaden it. And I think Emily spoke about this a little bit earlier. Maybe you start with this. How do you broaden the conversation?
So I think that we've launched recently with some larger fashion partners in the Brazil market that don't have necessarily as a brand a strong sustainable value proposition. And I think that that's been bringing some really new learnings to us as a brand. That usually starts with someone on the buyer team or inside the team who loves Pantys and it changed their life. And so that's really, we kind of try to work from the inside of these big corporations with people that like our product. But what's super interesting is when we did our first post and launch with them, we saw all the comments under the post was like, oh, gross. What is this? Like, are we going back in time to like somebody? And I loved it. My team was, you know, kind of startled, but I said, this is great. We're reaching a totally new audience and we're breaking new barriers as a brand. And so I think that it's super important to partner as well, not just with this eco-friendly, you know, staying in that niche, but getting out of that bubble and reaching more people. You're actually going to start driving a whole different level of impact. And that ripple effect, Christian, that you mentioned, you know, it's so important to start making waves in other circles and communities. to scale your impact as well. So I think we start, you know, with those few people on the teams inside that maybe have tried the product and love it, but then, you know, trying to go out and not being afraid of, you know, what the reaction will be with new audiences.
And again, Christian, Alejandra, I mean, you work for some of the biggest retailers on the planet. I mean, how are you broadening your conversation with a wider range of consumers beyond that sort of self-selecting group of green consumers today? Christian, maybe you can start.
Yeah, I think one interesting example, and it's probably more towards artisans, which we can see is Nest. You know, the Nest Artisans Guild is a great example of how, you know, large companies have been able to kind of advance the agenda of social procurement, you know, funding an organization like that, and helping entrepreneurs demystify some of these requirements, help them with trainings. You know, I heard this thing about how do we provide those additional information to ensure that we, you know, break down these terms and conditions and, you know, kind of build their capacities. You know, capacity building is such a freely used word today. That we need to ensure that, you know, we build the capacities of these entrepreneurs, not just for our businesses, but also to kind of make them, you know, able to kind of navigate through other businesses as well. So I feel that, you know, developing such organizations who can be helpful in mediating this whole message across and help us, big companies as well as help your entrepreneurs, you know, work through this and navigate through this, and then create a brand out of it. I think that's something I feel is a great way of approaching this, and I feel that there could be more of nests across for different, you know, product lines. So I feel that's probably something, you know, interesting to think about.
Thank you very much, Alejandra.
I think we have, at least here in CNA Mexico, I think we have the opposite problem. We don't seem to be able to reach to the kind of consumers to care about more sustainable solutions, because some of these things are very complicated to understand. To give an example, in 2017, CNA was the first fashion brand to certify a product as cradle to cradle, which is the certification related to circular economy. And well, a lot of people here know what it is. I see they doing this. And then you have this in the store here in Mexico. And people, first of all, they don't know what's cradle to cradle. It's in English. What is that? I don't understand. I don't care. Then the garment, a t-shirt, looks exactly the same as a non-cradle to cradle t-shirt. And then to explain what it is, you have to first start explaining what circular economy is. So try to do that in a little tag that people see on the store. No, it's practically impossible to do that. So what we have been doing now, it's we have noticed that we need to give like simpler messaging to our consumers, but we have a very strict set of rules on how to communicate. So for example, we have here in Mexico a water saving program with denim factories. All of our denim is made here in Mexico. And the statement we can put in the label is 60% of water reduction on the laundry process, which is what it is, what we can certify. But then you work with marketing and they say like, oh, we just want to put like less water. You're like, yeah, but it's not less water, it's less water in this particularly process, in this particular factory. Then we put that in the label, and then some customers might believe like, oh, so I'm going to save water when I do the laundry myself. So of course they don't know what a laundry process is in a factory. They surely know it. Why will they know that, you know? Yeah. So we do have the other problem, like how to communicate effectively things that actually matter to us as a brand in a way that the consumer understand it, care about it, and basically get it. So I think we have a backwards problem in this case, but we are working hard in how to communicate in a way that it's saying what we need to say, but it's also understandable and relatable to the consumer.
Alejandra, thank you. So sadly, we've got 3 minutes left. So I'm going to ask each of you for a 30-second, half-minute summary of what's the most interesting thing you've heard from this panel today to get to scale this relationship between big and small business. Shashwat, I'll come to you first, then Christian, Alejandra, and then to Emily. Shashwat, over to you.
I mean, before I get into the specifics, it's great to be in a panel of like-minded people who talk about the same things and understand the same things. But Of course, one thing that I've definitely learned is that there's a sea of change in the right direction, which means that, things are better than they were yesterday, right? And that's all as an entrepreneur that I could hope for. Of course, they could be faster, but what's good is that there are platforms like these which are helping us accelerate that. So I think that's like a word of encouragement that I've gotten.
Thank you. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Christian.
I think three very quick things, and I'll try to do that in 30 seconds. What I hear here today is that the whole idea of making those extra effort from both sides, from large companies as well as from entrepreneurs, to understand each other and kind of push a little bit and make that navigating through those complexities and try to understand and do better there. A kind of a day one mindset. I think that's definitely something that is needed. Continue to be customer obsessed. I think we are all customer-centric organizations, and then we kind of try to work backwards from there. And I want to close the last point with, I feel great always about positive storytelling. And I think that's what is needed every time when we do sustainable procurement, social procurement, all those terms we can use. There are hundreds of them. But I think the key is positive storytelling, and that's going to make a big change.
Inspiring, Christian. Thank you. Alejandra?
Yeah, takeaway for me is that nothing of this is new, which I find it good. Like nothing we have a conversation here, nothing came as a surprise. I think as industries, as entrepreneurs, as big companies, as consumers, we already have a better knowledge of what are the barriers and what we have to overcome. And that's actually a great step and a great difference from 10 years ago. So I find that quite uplifting. And also about storytelling, tagging on what Christian and Emily mentioned a lot. I think it's very important to note that not everybody has the context of what sustainability or social procurement is. So we have to start telling the story.
Thank you so much. Emily, last word.
Perfect. I think there are two main takeaways that everybody discussed today. One is simplifying procurement. It's what, who, and how is it made? And so I think as a company, we can't do all of those things at once. So having priorities and understanding for you and your unique business how you can make a difference is essential. And on the other side, I don't see sustainable procurement as a competitive advantage for brands anymore. I think it's a necessity. And so that collaboration, whether it's startups with startups or startups with big companies, I see as the future to helping accelerate sustainable procurement.
Emily, thank you. So look, I mean, we've rushed through 40 minutes. It's been brilliant. I take one thing away from it. For any large business listening, these small startups today are bringing the ideas in for the marketplace of the future. This is not about being niche. This is exposing yourself to how we will be consuming in the future. Go look out. So look, Alejandra, Christian, Shashwat, and Emily, thank you so much for being such a brilliant panel, full of energy, full of practical ideas. Much appreciated. Tom, back to you.
Thank you, Mike. And can I just reiterate our thank you to all of you. That was a seriously brilliant conversation. So thank you, Alejandra, Christian, Emily, and Shashwat. And thank you again, Mike, for moderating. The social procurement conversation is something which we're going to be looking at a lot next year. So we're looking forward to continuing that. And that was super helpful even just for us to listen to. So hopefully the audience found it useful too.